All right, today we're going to talk about adding integers. So our positives and our negatives. We kind of started doing this with the game yesterday. You kind of saw how they cancel each other out. And that happens in addition. Subtraction's different. We'll talk about that in just a couple days. But when we add two integers together with the positives and the negatives, they're opposites. And so they basically just cancel each other out. But if we have just all negatives, it's a little different. And we already know what happens with all positives. Okay, so we're going to represent these a couple different ways, and we're going to start by looking at them on a number line. So number 1 says, please draw and solve this math sentence. -30 plus -40. So how do we represent this on a number line? So we always start at 0, and so I want you to put just a little dotted line. That's where we're going to start. And now we need to go from 0 to our starting number. So we're starting at -30, so I need to draw an arrow that goes down to -30. So I draw this arrow down to -30, and I'm going to put another dotted line, and that's just to show that this hits at -30, because if it was kind of hanging there close and I don't have this line, maybe it's 29, maybe it's -31, but this line shows me, boom, it's right on -30. Okay, now I'm going to add -40. Now we know when we add 40 in general, things go up. So if we're adding a negative, it's the opposite. Things must go down. So from -30, we're going down 40. So we're going to the left 40. So we can count. Here's 10, here's 20, here's 30, here's 40. So we're going to end at -70. So the answer to this question is -70. So -30 plus 40 is -70. So now let's look at one. How does this apply to a word problem? So the original temperature for the day was 35. That's our starting point. So we're starting with 35. And overnight, the temperature dropped to a final low temperature of -10. So we're not adding -10. That's our end point. It started at 35. Something happened. Something was added. And we ended at -10. So this equals -10. And we want to represent this as an addition problem. So if we started at 35, so we got to go to 0 first, go up to 35. Okay. Right on 35. And then we have an arrow that's going to go back this way, all the way to -10. So we know this is going to end at -10. So from 35, it went down to -10. Well, first of all, we know if we added something and it went down, it was definitely a negative, right? If it was a positive, it would have gone up. So we added a negative, and if we measure this, if we go from 35 to 0, that's 35, and we went down another 10. So in total, we went 35 and 10. So we went down 45. So that means we added -45. So 35 plus -45 equals -10. All right, so number 3. Before Johnny went to bed, the temperature was -5 degrees. That's our starting point. The temperature dropped 7 degrees overnight. What's the new temperature? So it dropped 7. It went down 7. So if we're representing this as addition and it went down, it must have been a -7. All right, so if we put a negative and a negative together, what happens? So again, we start at 0. We go down to -5. And from -5, we're going to go down another 7. It's negative, so we have to go down to the left. Okay. From there, not to -7, another 7 from -5. So if we went down 5, we'd be at -10. And then it's just a little bit more. So it should be right in here. And if we were at 5 and went down another 7, that should be -12. Okay, last one, we just want to write a number sentence. We're not going to draw the picture. So it says, you owe your dad $12 because you borrowed some money to buy a shirt at the mall. So you owe 12. Later in the week, you gave him a $5 bill that you found in your pants pocket. How much money do you still owe him now? So that's pretty easy to give an answer to, right? You used to owe him 12, you paid him 5, so you're only going to owe him 7. Now, if we're going to write a number sentence, owing is like a negative. So right now, I'm at negative 12. I owe 12. I don't have it. I owe it. It's negative. But I paid back $5. So I didn't borrow more. I don't owe more. I'm going to owe less. That means this is going up. This is a positive 5. So we're at negative 12 owing. We added positive 5. So that means our debt should go down. So we should owe less. Okay, so negative 12 plus positive 5 would be negative 7. All right, real quick before we actually just work on the mechanics of this, I want to talk about the additive inverse property. So it says the sum of any number and its opposite. So think of the opposites is 7 and negative 7, 5 and negative 5, and sum is addition. So if you add opposites, you get 0. 7 plus negative 7 is 0. Negative 100 plus 100 is 0. Any two opposites that you add, you get 0, and this is called the additive inverse property. So if somebody asked you, what is the additive inverse of 7? You'd say negative 7. What's the number that when I add it to 7, I get 0? It's negative 7. What's the number that if I add it to negative 100, I get 0? Well, that's positive 100, the additive inverse. So it's kind of like the opposite. Okay, it's just specifically saying that it's going to give you 0 when you add it. So if we're trying to differentiate between the definitions, the opposite just says this number is the same distance away from 0. 7 and negative 7 are opposites because they're the same distance from 0. But if we're talking additive inverse, it's the same two numbers, but it's specifically talking about if I add them, I get 0. So it's just a different way of describing the numbers. Okay, that's called additive inverse property. So let's flip this over. All right, we're going to talk about how do we actually add these quickly in our head. So when the signs are the same, so both positive or both negative, all you have to do is add the numbers like you normally would, and then you're just going to keep the sign. Okay? So in this case, I had 3, and I'm adding 4. So the picture's already done here. 3 plus 4. So this is my 3, and I'm adding my 4. So if I have these positives, which are our filled in circles in our visual here, if I just combine my solid circles here, I just get more of them. So 3 solids plus 4 solids gives me 7 solids total. And the same thing happens with negatives. Okay, the open circles represent your negatives. So if I have 3 open circles and 4 open circles, now I have 7 open circles, or negative 7. This was positive 7. So that's pretty easy. So if I just see negative 3 plus negative 4, I know it's negative 7. 2 negatives give you more negatives. All right, so we're going to try and draw a representation for these. So for 5 plus 9, I'm going to draw 5 filled in circles. It seems like a pain, but it's not that hard. And I'm going to add 9 of them. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So when I add them together, I just get more of them. Okay, so I have my 5, and then I have my 9. And if I counted that up, my 5 and my 9, the answer, of course, is 14. So try this one. If it's negative 5 plus negative 9, now we have open circles, a little easier to draw. And nothing's going to cancel. Open circles don't cancel open circles. We just get more of them when we add them together. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 negatives. Okay, so adding positive 5 and positive 9 is the same as adding negative 5 and negative 9. You just keep the sign. You add them together and you keep the sign. So we're not going to draw the pictures for these. We're just going to do the math. So if I had 49 negatives and another 2 negatives, I now have to have negative 51. If there's 3 of them in a row like this, all you got to do is just do them in pieces. So let's start with negative 7 plus negative 5. If I do that piece first, a negative and a negative gives me more negatives, 12 of them total. And now I'm taking those 12 negatives and adding another 10 negatives. So I get even more. I should have 22 negatives. So it's really, really easy. We don't need to be scared of adding negative numbers. Now it's a little different when the signs are different, and this is where that game we played yesterday starts to come in. So there's two different ways you can do it. You can cancel as many positives and negatives as you can and see what's left over. And that's kind of what we did with that game. If you had a red 5 and a black 6, the red 5 cancels out most of the 6, leaving you just one positive. So that's kind of how that works. Or the rule you might find in a textbook says subtract the numbers. So up here we added the numbers together, even if they were negative. 5 and 9 was 14, and then we kept the sign. So now if the signs are different, one's positive, one's negative, we can subtract the numbers and then keep the sign of the larger absolute value, or the bigger digit. Okay, so if I have 6 plus negative 3, the answer is 3. So if I want to think of it as the cancellation method, if you look right here, 6 positives, 3 negatives. Well, these 3 negatives are each going to cancel out 1 positive, and so what am I left with? These 3 are my answer. Okay. If I wanted to do it this way, subtract, so I see one's positive, one's negative. So in my head, I'm going to do 6 minus 3, and that's 3. And then I look at these two digits, and I look at the absolute value. 6 is the bigger one. That basically means I started with more positives. So if I started with more positives, then I have to end with positives. Now here I start with more negatives than positives. So that means I'm going to be left over with some negatives. So I still subtract 6 minus 3 and get 3. And then since I started with more negatives than positives, my answer is negative. If I use the cancellation method, even if it's mentally, okay, I do this mentally. I just cancel as many positives with negatives as I can, and whatever I'm left with is my answer. So I started with 6 negatives, but 3 of them got canceled by the 3 positives, so I'm left with 3 negatives. All right, so let's try these. I want you to draw a representation for the first 3. So negative 4 plus positive 5. So I need to fill these in if they're positive. And if you line them up like this, it's really easy to see that the 4 negatives cancel 4 positives. And so whatever's left is my answer. So I have 1 positive left. So the answer to this is 1. You could even think of it on a number line. If you started at negative 4 and you went up 5, you'd end at 1. Because if you're at negative 4, think about getting to 0. From negative 4 to 0, you have to go up 4 spots. So if I'm going all the way 5 spots, that's 1 more past 0. So it's 1. If I wanted to use this other method, subtract the 2 numbers because one's positive and one's negative. So 5 minus 4 is 1. And then whichever one you had more of, or the larger absolute value, which is here, the positives, my answer is positive. All right, 7 plus negative 2, let's represent it. Positive 7. And a negative 2. Cancellation method says these 2 cancel, so I'm left over with 5 positives. So the answer is 5. Or the other method, subtract the 2. 7 minus 2 is 5. I started with more positives, so my answer is positive. So 6 plus negative 8. 6 positives. 8 negatives. Clearly, we've got a bunch of canceling, and there's 2 open circles left. So that means my answer is negative 2. So if I looked at this, I would just say, okay, positive 6 cancels 6 of these negatives. I've got 2 negatives left over. If you wanted to use the rule, subtract 8 minus 6 is 2. I started with more negatives, so my answer is negative. Try the last 2. I'll give you a second to try them. If you need more time to try these, you can pause the video. So 106 positive plus negative 108. Think about what's going to cancel. All of these 106 positives are going to cancel 106 negatives. So I'm still going to have some negatives left over. How many? 2 of them. Or use the rule, subtract the 2 numbers because you see a positive and a negative. So that's 2. And then just think about which one has the larger absolute value, or which one do I start with more of. I started with more negatives. My answer must be negative. Okay, this one in pieces, starting here. 6 negatives cancel 6 positives, leaving me 3 positives. And now I'm going to take my positive 3 and add a negative 2. So it's like if you're playing a game and you're at 3, and then you lose 2, you get a negative 2. What are you at? You're at 1. So the 2 negatives cancel away 2 of my positives, leaving me just